While both Seoul and Beijing felt the time was right for agreement on improving relations, that level of cooperation did not stretch as far as comments from China on the Kim Jong-un-Vladimir Putin summit. Let's turn to Professor Joel Atkinson for more. Welcome back, Professor.
Yeah, good morning. It's nice to be here.
Security talks between Seoul and Beijing took place for the first time in 9 years here in Seoul. Now, can we see the revival of such dialogue as a good signal in Seoul-Beijing relations?
Yes, the dialogue held in Seoul yesterday was a so-called 2+2 involving vice minister level foreign affairs officials as well as high-ranked defense officials. As you mentioned, it was the first such dialogue in 9 years. Seoul has always wanted as much dialogue as possible and is at a higher level as possible. So the fact that Beijing is willing to start this again is a signal that it believes some useful cooperation may be possible, or at least that it wants to send a signal to that effect.
Well, what's notable about the talks from yesterday was that Beijing said it hopes Russia-North Korea relations will contribute to regional peace and stability. What's your take on what Beijing said?
Well, the talks reportedly lasted about 4 hours, and then Korea's MOFA didn't release its statement until after midnight. And, the South Korean side expressed its deep concern about Putin's visit to North Korea and tried to convince China that strengthened military cooperation between those two would be bad for China. It also expressed concern about North Korea's provocations, such as those waste-filled balloons, as well as China's forceful repatriation of North Koreans in China back to North Korea. So then China's response, basically stating that its policy remains unchanged and emphasizing that it plays a constructive role in resolving issues on the peninsula. Well, to me, that suggests Beijing has no interest in strengthening cooperation with South Korea in a way that would hurt the interests of North Korea or Russia. But perhaps it is interested in strengthening cooperation in a way that would hurt the interests of the United States.
So not much of a surprising comment from China there again. And Putin's North Korea visit is also in full swing, as we all know. And did the two events just happen to take place at the same time, the Seoul-Beijing talks and Putin's North Korea visit? Is it just pure coincidence?
That's a good question. This dialogue was announced following the Korea-Japan-China trilateral meeting at the end of May, and then the Russian media reported that Putin would visit Pyongyang only a little over a week ago. So we can't rule out something going on behind the scenes, but I think it's almost certainly a coincidence. Putin, of course, is a very busy man. He also has a trip to Vietnam. He's not going to arrange his schedule around a Korea-China vice ministerial meeting. And some are suggesting that China allowing the meeting to go ahead, despite the timing, despite that coincidence, suggests that it's prioritizing Seoul over Pyongyang. But I think that's really a stretch. And when the Chinese government says the timing is unrelated, then it's probably safe to believe that.
Right, then will Seoul and Beijing security talks and Putin's North Korea visits, complicate relations between North Korea, China, and Russia? I mean, will China be put in an, uncomfortable spot?
Well, this really depends on your theory of China-Russia-North Korea relations, because no one really knows the true dynamics except those three. And there's so much disinformation and misdirection around the issue. It seems the Yoon administration hopes that this dialogue is going to increase pressure on North Korea. Seoul can say that Beijing stands together in insisting that those provocations are unacceptable and that progress has to be made on the nukes and the missiles. And so some South Korean analysts, they're focusing on little signs in the language that Beijing is using to suggest that might be the case. However, I very much doubt Beijing sees it that way. Its focus is on the Americans. Beijing can say, see, your ally South Korea wants a cooperative relationship with us and needs our help, and North Korea and Russia are deepening their cooperation. If you want to change this, then start agreeing to some of the concessions we want you to make. And indeed, the Chinese state media outlet, the Global Times, is basically saying about this dialogue that President Yoon is in a weak position and ready to improve his attitude towards China, but it's going to be a long-term effort to get South Korea on the right track, which I think, basically means essentially decreasing its cooperation with Washington.
Let's also talk about the relations between South Korea and Russia, which have not been the best recently. And Putin did say in an interview early this month that Moscow is willing to soften ties with Seoul. Now, what kind of strategic move do you think that the South Korean government needs to make things better with the Kremlin?
Well, I think basically the price will be no more weapons transfers, such as artillery shells to Ukraine, even if they're via a third country like the US, and also taking a step back from Ukraine diplomatically. So would President Yoon be willing to do that? I think, the Global Times is not wrong that President Yoon is seeming a little chastened after his party's poor showing in the legislative elections and, the difficulties having controlling North Korea's behavior. So he may be willing to take a step back from his, what he's calling the values-based diplomacy and his efforts to push Korea forward as a global pivotal state. So we'll have to wait and see on that. I think, however, it's not clear that Russia would be willing to give much in return if he did. North Korea is playing an important role in supplying armaments, but it also provides labor and so on. Therefore, I think Russia-North Korea relations are going to keep getting better, keep getting stronger, regardless of any concessions Yoon makes.
That is indeed a concern. All right, Professor Atkinson, thank you so much for your time this morning. You have a lovely day.
Yeah, thank you.